Hi, everybody. I'm going to give you guys a pretty, very high-level talk about where I think the internet is going, ways in which we kind of misunderstand it today. I think there's lots and lots of interesting companies being built, and lots of companies that are doing things where I think there's just greater opportunities. And so I'm going to try and reframe a little bit how we think about the internet and what it might enable. And to give you guys an idea of where this is coming from, I've taken a well-trodden path in Silicon Valley. I lived there for 4 years or so. I just moved back to Ireland a year and a half ago. I worked at Google in the product and design team there, at Facebook in the product and design team there, and I now work at Intercom, which is a startup, thankfully a fast-growing startup, based in Dublin and in San Francisco. So anyone who works at small companies or works at big companies and wants to move to small companies, I have plenty of pros and cons for both, so let me know. So there's two parts to this. The first part is that the internet, and apparently this is a picture of the internet that I found on the internet. The internet is just being thought of in ways that I think could be different and better. And the second part tries to look at this in a bit more depth. And this screen that we all experience today, the screen where we have lots of apps, where people tap apps to open them, where people who build apps obsess about getting their icon onto the home screen of people's phones and tablets and so on, I think that that's going to go away. I think that the screen won't exist in a few years. I think there will be a place on your device where you go and access all your apps. I think people, of course, will open apps, but I don't think it will be the dominant way that we interact with apps. And I think it has pretty big ramifications for how we think about design and building products over the next year, 2 years, maybe 3 years. So the first part of this. So I think the best way often to understand these things in times of great change, I think the internet is a time of great change, is to look backwards and understand what happened when other technologies were introduced into society. And as product builders, as people who are in this industry, we don't do that very often. So I have a few different examples. The car, or the invention of the combustion engine, which led to the car, is a great example of this, where when the car started driving around streets, people were quite taken aback. They didn't really know what it was. They were used to seeing horses and carts and steam engines, which had lots of steam coming out of them. This thing was entirely different. And people obsessed about that technology. They didn't really understand how it moved, like what was the thing that was propelling this big chunk of metal to move forward. But the car in and of itself was not the most interesting thing. When we look back, that was not the thing that people needed to be worried about or even interested in. What emerged from the combustion engine in the car was lots of different things. One is this network of roads. This network, and the United States built a huge network all across the country to try and connect the East and the West, vast distances. And this network of roads led to other things. The people who were designing these networks of roads couldn't really foresee the kinds of things that it would enable. But it was things like suburbia. It totally changed how people live. It changed where they live, in close proximity to their family or to their friends. It really changed the kinds of things that they did every day, the kind of places that they went, the opportunities. It led to traffic and traffic jams and people avoiding getting in their car. It led to big changes in commerce. Big box retail emerged, this idea that you would have big giant warehouses on the edges of towns where land was cheap, and you could truck in vast quantities of goods into these warehouses and sell these things for much cheaper than someone who is in the center of a town or city, who they're paying higher rent. The economics is just fundamentally different. And these big changes came about from the combustion engine, from the car. I think electricity is another amazing example of this, where when people were first trying to understand how electricity worked, they couldn't imagine things, not that great far into the future from when it was invented, whereby people would be in space, human beings would be in space. That was probably disturbing enough at the time, but they could look at Earth and see where people live. That's an incredible thing. You can look at this is the Iberian Peninsula, and you can see where people are. You can see Madrid, and you can see Portugal, you can see Lisbon, you can see the tip of Africa. It's incredible. You can actually, from space, see where people are. And that's because of electricity. Electricity also changed the kinds of things that we do. It changed the types of activities that were even possible. Many sports, for example, wouldn't really be as pervasive as today as they are without things like electricity. It changed where we eat. It changed where people could set up businesses. It changed where people could mingle. It was incredibly, incredibly transformative into the way we spend our time. So this is important because these things are networks. The road infrastructure is a network. The electricity is a network. And the internet is a network. And we don't often frame it in those terms. Often we just think about the products and the apps that we build. And I think it's really, really important to start thinking about networks and the types of things the unique properties of networks, the types of things that can enable, rather than our individual product sense, our individual business, our individual startup, or our app. The incredible thing about this is that the internet is really, really young. It's only about 20 years old for all practical purposes. That's very, very young for a media technology. Many, many media communication technologies take decades and decades, and sometimes even hundreds of years to stabilize. Despite it only being 20 years old, it's already radically changed many, many parts of the things we do every day. It's completely changed news. Even a decade ago, people, to get the latest news, would go and buy a newspaper. You don't do that anymore. Maybe you'd watch TV, you'd watch the news. Certainly in Ireland, the news is on at 6 o'clock every day. I don't know, is that the same here in Turkey? But people would sit down in front of their TVs at 6 p.m. every single day because that's when you got the latest news. You don't need to do that anymore. People don't even go to news organizations necessarily. They go to networks and platforms like Twitter, and sometimes they don't even find out things from news organizations. They find it from other people they follow, friends, etc. It's really changed news. It's also changed how governments get elected. The internet has led to all these emerging platforms that literally change how people think about governance, or even whether they need a government, or even what that government should be doing. Much greater transparency in governance. It's really radically altering that. It's changing how we play games. Human beings have played games for hundreds and thousands of years. And the internet is changing who we can play games with. You can play games with people from all over the world. It's changed how we buy things. And not only things like the rise of Amazon and companies like that, where we can buy things pretty much from all over the world, things we never had access to before. But it's also changed how real-life businesses work, how brick-and-mortar businesses work, because the economics have changed for them, and they, here Best Buy in the United States need to price match against Amazon. This is my gratuitous family photograph that I put in. This is my wife and I. We lived in San Francisco. We had twins, and 2 years ago, and my parents and my wife's parents were in Ireland, where we're from. So they couldn't be there for the birth, obviously. We're talking, 5,000 miles. But they were able to experience that in ways that were unimaginable even 5 or 10 years ago. They were able to see photographs, literally minutes, not real time, but minutes after our children were born. It was just an entirely different experience. And it's also changed how we move about the world. Even things like people coming to new places. We, again, even 3, 5, 10 years ago, would take maps with us, printed maps, or we'd take books. We don't do that anymore. Often we walk out of airports or walk out of train stations and pull out our phones and just not even think about where we're going. We just put in a destination, and the device, the phone, will tell us where to go. Or it's just changed how we think about those things. And when you think about all these things, think about some of these radical transformations that are happening across these very diverse industries, there's one problem that I've seen over the course of the last few years that just reoccurs and reoccurs and reoccurs, and I tried to understand it a bit better. When I was working at Facebook, a lot of people also think about similar things, and I learned a lot from people there. And again, you really start to need to look backwards to understand why this problem even exists. So if you go back over the last few hundred years and look at all these communication technologies, it's pretty amazing that all these things have been invented in such a short space of time. But when you look back and try and understand what was society like when the printing press was invented, and what did the printing press end up doing, and how long did it take, and what were the causal reasons why things changed, it's pretty fascinating because there's one theme that reoccurs over and over. I'm not going to use all of these have this pattern, but I'm only going to show you 3 really quickly today. So the printing press. So when the printing press was invented, people didn't print newspapers. They didn't print even one-page pamphlets like this one from the Reformation. They printed huge tomes that the monks were making. They literally looked at, what are the kinds of things people are handwriting today, and who can we help most? And monks, well, monks had to hand transcribe these crazy long things, so people started printing that, and that's what the printing press was used for quite a period of time. Of course, it took many, many decades later, even hundreds of years later, for the printing press to really see its importance and its value in things like newspapers, again, which took about 100 years to stabilize and evolve. And things like the Reformation, some people would say that the Reformation was only possible because of the printing press and the fact that you could print these pamphlets, hundreds and thousands of them, and distribute them really easily. The second example is the telephone. I think that's my favorite example. So Alexander Graham Bell, who's widely credited as the inventor of the telephone, it was very similar to today. He had this invention, and again, there was actually a lot of people trying to invent something that looked like the telephone around that time. It was very similar to today. He had to go and get funding. He had to go and find people who had more money than he had and get them to persuade them to give him some money so they could invest and everyone would win. But his pitch, just like we have pitches today, his pitch was that the telephone was for broadcasting. It was for standing on a stage like this one, or for a music concert, or for a religious sermon, where people could dial in from all over the world into this telephone and hear what was going on. It was very much about broadcasting and not about one-to-one communication. And that was just largely his opinion formed by the things he was looking at in society at that time, one of which was this emergence of mass media. The last example I'm going to show you is television. Again, the first TV shows were not like the TV shows we see today. The first films and cinema were not like the movies we see today. I'm going to illustrate this by showing you the first TV ad. This was the first television ad that was aired in the United States in 1941.
America runs on Bolivar time.
That's it. A lot of people, when I show this, they're waiting for something else to happen. But this is it. And if you look at what this is, it's just a print ad, a poster, and a radio ad merged together. Right, again, they had this new medium, a TV, and the question was, what can we do with it? Well, they looked at print, and they looked at radio, and they looked at the media of that time, and kind of smashed it together. And obviously, TV ads today are much, much different than this, much better, I would hope. Marshall McLuhan, who's a big influence on me and many other people in and around Silicon Valley, describes this far better than I ever could, much more articulately, as we're walking backwards into the future. We are looking at technology that exists today, society as it exists today, the way things work today, and applying that to this new technology. And I think we're just selling ourselves short. I think the internet is a far more powerful technology than many of the businesses that we build on it really give it credit for. And I think you can see it. I think if you look at these products that we're building, that all of us are collectively building, you can see it. You can see that this website looks like print. It just looks too much like a newspaper. It looks too much like a magazine. I think we have this network, this internet, this incredibly powerful thing, and there just must be something better than this. Right? This just looks too much like technologies that we have today. And for me, the biggest kind of takeaway from this, when we think about the internet and think about the possibilities that we have and the things that we're building, is to not think about pages and not think about screens. Pages are from books. Pages are from magazines. If we apply the metaphor of pages to things, I think, again, we're just going to sell ourselves short. And it's much more empowering to think about systems and designing systems. My background is in design. I often talk to designers about trying to design systems rather than designing screens. And I'm sure I'm guilty of this as much as anyone, poring over a screen, trying to figure out what's on that screen, when actually we really should be spending our time designing the system that drives the content and the interactions that appear on that screen. So that's part one, which is to think about networks and systems rather than pages or screens. And so part two, hopefully, will make this a little bit more concrete, because I think there's big changes happening around, especially around iOS 8 and future versions of iOS, around future versions of Android, that I think are going to make this a reality for all of us. And I hope today I can just start you guys thinking about this sooner, rather than maybe you might have to think about it later. Maybe I'll be wrong, who knows. But this is where we're at today, in my head anyway. So part two. So This is the internet that I grew up with, and I'm sure the internet that most of you grew up with, which is one in which we have these pages are all linked together. It was a pretty solitary experience. Actually, when I guess I'm revealing my age, but I was kind of in university when the internet kind of became, I guess, dominant in society, and you would go online. Like, you would go up to your bedroom and go online. It was a very, very different world than we have today. That is not the world we have today. It's a much more pervasive medium than it was then. And this distinction between being online and being offline, I would argue, has gone away. We still use these terms, and I still use them sometimes, but I don't think it doesn't really exist. I think we're always connected. Even the tiny moments of solitude in airplanes where you had no internet is now stopping as well. So you're always connected. You're just always connected. And that changes the types of experience that people should build, and it changes the types of experience that people even want or need, because it was very different to sit in your bedroom on a chair and look at a screen. You were, all-encompassing versus just walking around and things going off in your pocket or in your bag or on your wrist or wherever. So this idea that we're always connected is really, really important. And I think it's the key to thinking about mobile. I don't like the term mobile. I don't like the term mobile first. I think that's really misleading. I don't think it's about devices. I think people think about devices all the time. For me, mobile is about two things. Mobile devices are about two things. One is about access. It's simply access to information. You can argue whether that's on a phone, what screen size that phone is. If you look at all the tablets and phones and phablets and MacBooks and iPads, there's just a big blend of screens. There's no real clear distinction between what a big screen is or what a small screen is. And really all this is about access to information. It just means that people don't have to take out a laptop or take out a thing out of their bag. And now increasingly they won't have to take a thing out of their pocket, which is their phone. They can just look at their wrist. And it's just about access to information. And what's amazing is that it's global. You can get access to information. People, if you have a phone connection, you can pretty much have any information that any of us can have today, no matter where you are. This is a photograph of a remote jungle in Southeast Asia. And it's also about publishing. It just meant, at first it was about access, and very soon after it evolved into being about publishing, and it meant that people could publish content no matter where they were in the world. And this is increasing exponentially. If you look at the amount of things that people are publishing, the increase is exponential. It's actually hard to kind of comprehend. And when you think about these things, all this content people are publishing, you realize that you know a lot about people, or we know a lot about people. People are saying things, posting things, associating themselves with things. And it's all the way from, people's acute needs. Like, what do they need right now, today? They have an urgent need to catch a bus, catch a train, get a taxi, all the way to their hopes and their dreams, their aspirations, and everything in between, who their friends are, what they're interested in, what their friends are interested in, their location, their behavior, right? This is the demography. This stuff has been tracked and captured and recorded, and of course, there's a ton of privacy questions about this, but it just means that we have this incredible network and this incredible network of information. And I think what that means for all of us is that we have this new product canvas. And this product canvas is one in which there's a wide variety of inputs coming from all these different sources, and it just changes the kinds of things that we can build, and it changes the kind of things that we can do. And for me, we as product builders don't think enough about the companies that are outside our own company. We don't think about who we can integrate with, or who might integrate with us, or whether we should open up our experience to other things. And I think that's going to really have to change. Facebook is a fantastic example of this. Facebook is not a blue and white website or app. It's a system. It's a system of objects, of people, of interests, of businesses, relationships between those objects. And when people think about Facebook, they often think about one of these things. They think about the news feed, which is the dominant experience people have, or they think about the timeline, which is how they look to the rest of the world. And businesses think about pages. And this is predominantly the way people think about it. They think about the screen. But I think it's much more important to think about the system that drives those screens. All of those screens are just aggregations of content. And there's a much more important, more atomic unit that people need to start considering, which is this thing that Facebook calls a story. And each individual story, whether it's a photograph or a status update or an event or somebody liking something, somebody listening to a song, all of those things can be reconnected and reaggregated in all sorts of different ways. And you start to suddenly see that this idea of a system, rather than a page or a screen, is much more powerful, and there's just lots more creative opportunities there. There's loads and loads of other examples. I don't have that many. I'm just going to show you a few. Nike is one. Nike have all this system of interconnected things. I think Intercom is another example. I won't go into the details of what Intercom is today. You guys can check it out afterwards if you want. It's a customer communications platform. We're doing a whole bunch of different things. But when I joined Intercom a year and a half ago, it's very easy to look at the screen and you just want to redesign it. There's just things that you would change. But this screen in and of itself isn't that important. What was important was that there's all these connected objects. There's things like a user profile or a company profile or a message or a reply. And then there's tools. There's tools that can manipulate those objects. And then there's different views of those objects. But the views are kind of the last thing you would consider. And so one of the first things I did was draw this diagram where I was trying to figure out, okay, Intercom is a web app, and we have a mobile app, and we've got SDKs, but what is it? What's the system behind it? What are all the things? And I think diagrams like this, and this is not an information architecture diagram. This is a diagram of the objects that are in the system. And diagrams like this are far more important to try and figure out what you're going to build than the screens that we all obsess over most of the time. There's loads of examples of this. I think Facebook Messenger is one of the best examples. Facebook Messenger to me is a beautifully designed system, mostly because you don't even think about it. Like here, for example, I'm sending a message to my brother and my wife. I don't think about whether they're on a phone or on a tablet. I don't think about whether they're online or offline. I don't think about whether they're going to get it on an iOS device or an Android device. I just don't think about those things. I just send them a message and it just works. And the reason that it just works is not a coincidence. It works because there's fantastic system design happening to make sure that all these connected things join up, that the experiences all make sense, that there's this clean workflows across all these surfaces and tools. And it's really important because you don't have to go to Facebook Messenger to get the message, right? You can be notified about it. And notifications are changing really rapidly. What used to happen is that we would get a notification like this one, which would say, you have a new comment, and the notification was just a signpost. All it said was, hey, you've got a reply, and you need to go over there. And you tap it or swipe it, and you would be sent over there. You'd be sent to the app. And that's changing. That's thinking about apps as destinations, which I think is really, really changing. Android has already done stuff like this. You can see here that in the notification center in Android, you can reply to things. Here's tweets. You can reply to a tweet. Now, granted, the reply still takes you to Twitter, to the reply screen in Twitter. I'll get to that in a sec. I think that's going to change too. But you can also see that there are things happening here, like you can favorite it, and it just favorites it. Or if, The Guardian are giving me notifications about the World Cup when it was on, I can just save it, and it's saved. I don't need to go to The Guardian. I don't need to go to the app. I didn't need to go to that screen of all these buttons and open The Guardian. iOS 8 is taking this, this is incremental, but it's an important increment, I think. On the left-hand side here, they've got a very similar thing to Android, where these things take you to that app. But it's changing, and suddenly you can start to reply to iMessages right there and then. So suddenly, this notification is not really a notification anymore. It's kind of like a mini app. You can actually start to take action and create content in there. That's a very, very different thing. The next version of Android is, again, these are increments, taking it another step further and saying, well, hang on, what if we broke all these things out into cards so that all these notifications are all independent, because not really notifications anymore. And at the bottom, you can see them kind of stacking behind each other. And so suddenly you have this new paradigm, which is a notification of something, content, and the action all in one place, all on this independent card. And then you start to think to yourself, well, if these cards exist independently, like where else could they go? Like what else could we put them on? Who else could we integrate with? It's really important. Cards are a really big emerging thing in app design, and it's really important to not just consider them as a design pattern. They are a fantastic design pattern, but to also, and much more importantly, think about them as containers for third-party content. That is a much more powerful way to think about this. There's loads of examples of this. Twitter, for example, have these cards. You can subscribe right there in the card on the left, or you can buy right there in the card on the right. And there will be very soon, I would imagine, full flows within those cards where you can go buy, put in your credit card, and get a delivery, get a receipt, all in the card. You never left Twitter. You went and bought something on some e-commerce site, and you never left Twitter. And that is a very, very different thing to designing an e-commerce app or an e-commerce website. So this screen starts to make less and less sense. Why would you open Facebook when you can just get the notification and reply, like, comment, share from the notification center? If we have these independent cards, why would I have to open my phone, open this, tap Facebook, open the app? I think it's just changing. I think the screen is, and again, I'm kind of going out on a limb here, but I think it's going to go away. I think in 2 or 3 years, we won't be looking at the screen anymore and worrying about whether our app shows up on the screen. We will be thinking about different things entirely. And Google Now is directionally fascinating to me. You can look at Google Now and take it at face value, which is that it's trying to show you stuff you're interested in before you need to know about it. You don't have to go and look for things. It's bringing information to you rather than opening apps. I don't have to open the World Cup app to get World Cup scores during the World Cup. I don't have to open the events app or the calendar app to be told that, hey, you have a meeting at 6 o'clock, here's how you get there, it's 4 minutes commute. Or that there's new content available on these blogs that I read, or what the weather is where I am. Right? It's just taking this information and bringing it to me, and it's learning all the time. It's asking me questions like, like the middle one was amazing. Like, do you want to hide the scores of the World Cup so that you're going to go home and watch it later? Is this place your work? Do you want to set that as your work? Right? So it's starting to learn. And when I woke up this morning, I went for breakfast here in the hotel and opened up Google Now, and I've done nothing. I did not do a thing. And Google Now started showing me this stuff like, well, you're obviously in Istanbul, you haven't been here before. Here's nearby attractions. Here's photo spots nearby. Here's how you say good morning in Turkish. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that. Here's the weather, right? Here's the conversion from euros to the local currency. Like why is it not you have US dollars? Well, because it knows that I live in Dublin and I deal in euros. So this is changing, and it's important to think about these cards as containers for content, and this content can come from anywhere. This content can come from any third party. I think increasingly with Google Now, if you look at this, a lot of this stuff is coming from Google properties, but I would imagine very, very soon you'll start to see stuff coming from more and more and more and more third parties. So apps as publishing tools rather than apps as destinations. Thinking about when you build apps, how can you publish content into these new systems, these notification systems? It's quite possible that will be a far more important channel for interacting with your users than actually opening the app will in the next few years. And so I'm just going to finish by kind of showing you what this might look like. These are ugly sketches that I did. But you can imagine a world in which you're getting this content, and it's coming from different places. That may be on Google Now. That may be on the OS of the device you're using. Maybe a new company emerges that builds this ecosystem, and we all adapt it and adopt it. Who knows? But you can imagine a world very quickly where it's kind of like Google Now. So rather than opening up Facebook and scrolling through the newsfeed of 100 things, it's just popping in the most important things, just the same way you get notifications today. And then you can very quickly extrapolate that and think, well, if it's going up and down, like, why can't it go sideways? Why can't you start to suddenly see, okay, this is the most important thing from Facebook. It's like, well, actually, I want to see more. And you start going the other way, and you effectively have the Facebook newsfeed only somewhere else. You didn't open the Facebook app to do that. And of course, these things will be everywhere. They won't just be on phones. They'll be on watches and wearables. I think the Apple Watch and the watches that are being built on Android are fascinating. I have no idea where that will end up, but I think it's really, really fascinating. And I think we should all be thinking about it and starting to think about these systems and designing these systems. So this thing, I just think, is not going to be as important as we think of it today. One last example, which is a bit crazy, but I don't think this will happen, but I think it's intellectually interesting. If you're a business like the New York Times, you publish content, you published a newspaper, you made a lot of money from it. That didn't work out increasingly with the internet, so you started building a website, and now these organizations are starting to see that this content is showing up on Twitter and on Facebook and these other ecosystems that the New York Times has little control over. But Twitter and other companies are starting to build more control for these companies, so the New York Times can start to put their content in these cards and people can take actions in these cards. So with the rise of all these more open APIs, with these SDKs, in a world in which the New York Times is getting most of its business and most of its traffic and most of its engagement from cards that exist elsewhere, why do they even have a website? It's a huge overhead. Why even have a website if you could publish the stuff and have revenue sharing agreements or whatever elsewhere? And I think that's something. I don't think that will happen necessarily, but I think it's interesting to think about it. So that's it. This is a quick recap. I think we need to think a lot more about networks and not about pages. We need to start designing systems, stop designing screens, and we need to start thinking about cards. I've written here cards, not apps. Of course, apps will still exist. Of course, apps will be publishing systems, but I think we just need to think much more about what happens outside of the confines of that app itself. If you want to read more, we have a blog inside Intercom. There's tons more content like this on there. Cheap pitch to try Intercom. If you're an app owner, I think you'll find it really interesting and valuable. If you want these slides, just send me a tweet or email me, paul@intercom.io, and I'd love to hear questions on Twitter and so on afterwards. So thanks very much.